Let's talk to Robert Oulds, who's the director of the Bruges Group, to find out what the latest situation is with this story, because it's the story that won't go away and it's the story that never seems to change. Robert, very good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Mike.
This really is going to end up being probably the hill that Rishi Sunak dies on, isn't it? Because no matter what he does with the economy, no matter what he does in every other area, even if it's exploring from new oil and gas fields in the North Sea, immigration will be the one thing that if he doesn't solve, will finish him off, I think.
You're absolutely right. If Rishi Sunak has any chance of not facing a total defeat in the general election, which is probably just a year and a half away, but less even, then of course he has to make sure that working class voters, many of whom had voted for the Conservative Party for the first time in 2019, some, their parents, for instance, may well have voted for Margaret Thatcher in the early years of her premiership after the victory of the Falklands War and the opportunities that Thatcherism promised them, owning your own home and so forth. But any opportunity of having those voters stay with the Conservative Party rests on tackling the issue of immigration. Of course, so far he's recognised that there's a problem, which is something. At least he realises this, because of course the polling evidence is quite clear, and the disaster that he's actually facing, and of course he's getting the right advice. But of course he has people such as Suella Braverman who are willing and ready to take action. But of course it seems that the bureaucrats in the Home Office and, of course, the lawyers are determined to get in the way of this, make sure they get as much fees for causing as much trouble as possible, and do as much as they can to undermine a policy that most people in this country want to see come to pass.
Exactly right. Because there will always be enough sort of disruptive qualities out there for people to make use of. Because it seems to me it's such an open kind of argument, isn't it, legally, that you can always find some reason to get it blocked. You can always find some judge who will put another stay of execution on somebody being sent out of the country. You know, there will always be another hurdle to jump over.
Indeed, you know, many of your viewers will be surprised to hear that people with criminal records can indeed become British citizens.
I mean, I was amazed at that. I thought I knew a reasonable amount about this business, but obviously I didn't know that. So how is that possible?
It is absolutely astounding, and the bar is so low for allowing people to gain access to the UK and to receive all the benefits, not necessarily benefits paid for by the taxpayer, but all the benefits we have in this country, it being relatively safe and enlightened and prosperous, mostly, for most people. Yet, of course, it's open to anybody around the world, which is making it harder for the least well-off to earn a decent wage and, of course, threatens our security. And as we've discussed before on this show, there will be many people coming here from abroad that have committed crimes and still haven't even been deported and have no right to remain here, have citizenship elsewhere, and yet still walking around the streets free, or indeed detained at Her Majesty's pleasure at great expense to the taxpayer when they needn't be here. It used to be said that being English was to win the lottery of life.
Yeah.
Indeed, it is and indeed should be. But it shouldn't be open to everybody to have those opportunities until, of course, they can show that they've earned it and indeed benefit those already here.
Right.
So we should have intelligent immigration, not ones which open to willy-nilly intent, and those that indeed threaten life in the UK or make it less prosperous for the least well-off, and of course perhaps less safe as well in many cases.
But that seems to be the problem, doesn't it? Sorry for interrupting, but you know, the people who help these migrants to stay in this country, sometimes by, as we saw last week in the Daily Mail, actually operating illegally and making up stories and suggesting that they provide them with, you know, a wife or something like that so that they can give them quicker residency and all of that. You know, these people believe, many of them, that unbridled immigration is a good thing and necessary and almost our duty to welcome everybody in here who wants to come.
Well, this idea is put about by those who believe they have a benefit to be had. There's somehow in their advantage, economic advantage, and indeed the legal establishment benefit from this because there will be cases going to court and to the European Court of Human Rights, and they will be receiving fees all at the taxpayer's expense. There will be immigration lawyers that benefit from this repeatedly. And of course, those that want to keep paying low wages to British people, people in this country, they benefit as well. And they've been quite clear about that. Lord Rose, when he spoke about the possibility of Britain leaving the European Union back in 2015, when he was giving a talk to the Select Committee at the House of Commons, said that if we left the European Union, there would be less immigration, and that would be a bad thing for employers because they want the lower wages. He was quite clear about that. And those at the very top will be benefiting from this. Even Polly Toynbee of The Guardian has wrote that Britain's immigration at the moment, it makes the rich richer and the poor poorer. Yeah. That's someone in The Guardian newspaper, Polly Toynbee, of all people, that is absolutely...
I mean, she is the champagne socialist, isn't she? I mean, she's an absolute, card-carrying Corbynite, for heaven's sake. But that's the thing. Anybody that's got any kind of understanding of Britain being a relatively small but very densely populated country, must know that there has to be a limit on the numbers coming in. I mean, just to go back for a moment to the criminal migrants who can become citizens, I mean, is there any kind of at least sliding scale of what crime they've committed? Because, I mean, one of the ones that I like to use as an example quite often of how ludicrous the system is a guy from, I think it's Albania, who runs a car wash up in Leicester, and he was asked why he couldn't be sent back to his own country, and he said, because I fear being murdered by my wife's family. When they said, why would you be murdered by your wife's family? He said, because I murdered her. So he's murdered his wife. He can't go home because he's worried about retribution. But he can stay here and run a business.
That is absolutely awful to hear, and that we're importing people into this country that have very different attitudes. In some cultures, there is less of a stigma. Clearly, in Albania, there is a problem with murdering wife, but there's honour killings, and that's something which has been imported into this country, and that is absolutely atrocious. And the fact that we have this person living here is really a threat, and usually if someone has committed a crime, they would either be a sexual predator or someone who is known to be committing domestic violence. There can be a register that they can be put on, and people can find that information. No doubt there's no information stored about this person, and anybody that would have misfortune of having relations with such a man or know him puts themselves at danger, women especially. Right. So we need to be very careful who we're letting in. And of course, he's working there at a car wash. He himself is also being exploited in the black economy. And this is how many of these migrants come here. They're coming here to take jobs in the black economy, low wages, low productivity. Their passports often taken and used as virtual slavery. There's many people working in the textile industry also forced into these conditions. And if we are going to have a humanitarian approach, we need to be helping people in their own countries rather than exploiting them in this country and providing cheap labour, which some people do very well out of, as we know. But we need to be really stopping people making perilous journeys across the channel. We need to be tough about this. We need to deport those that come, and those who repeatedly come first need to be ultimately charged. And we need to be very strong on this. And we need to recognise that we have to crack down on the people smugglers, and those people smugglers are criminals, and of course, unfortunately, in some cases, people smugglers are also those in the Home Office as well, who are facilitating all this from.
Well, let's not forget that was one of the Home Office unions that was party to the case in the Court of Appeal, which declared that Rwanda was in fact an illegal operation and that nobody could ever be sent there. So, I mean, you know what side their bread's buttered on. But it seems to me that an awful lot of the so-called new sites where migrants are supposed to be going, like RAF Wethersfield in Essex, RAF Scampton in Lincolnshire, it's all kind of on hold because they're not really sure what to do. And in Weatherfields especially, apparently there's a small number of diseases doing the rounds as well, including tuberculosis.
Indeed, tuberculosis was pretty much eliminated within Britain. Of course, it caused devastation throughout the 50s and 60s. Mobile testing units had to be set up. People were inoculated. The problem was got on top of through desperate effort. Now, of course, we find these diseases being reintroduced. Surely have we not learned anything from COVID? Of course, there we had to suffer the most perilous lockdowns and all the problems that's caused for the country's finances and indeed the economy and public health, as well, as people were reluctant to go to doctors. People were suffering heart conditions because of the lack of exercise and living in dreadful conditions, imprisoned in their homes because we were too open to countries that allowed diseases to come in. And we're doing the same again on a much smaller scale. And this now needs to be tackled. Yeah. And places such as you mentioned in Essex, where of course the former military base, former RAF, United States Army Force Base, Air Force Base, is being turned into an asylum refugee centre, and that of course will put a lot of pressure on the locals. People there will have nothing to do, but they'll be free to wander off and of course disappear into the black economy and put pressure on locals. Many people in that area are indeed struggling themselves, and there's social issues we need to get on top of. Many of our coastal towns are indeed suffering, and they shouldn't just be dumping grounds for those who have come from abroad illegally and needn't be here, that aren't indeed refugees, that are indeed economic migrants, that are young men looking for work and often yet to send back money to their families back. That's understandable. But of course, they should be working in their own countries, or indeed they've cost many borders to get here. They would have possibly arrived in Italy or Greece and had to go across a multitude of nations to get here. They're genuine asylum seekers. They should have been looked after here rather than pushed on by European authorities, in many cases the French authorities, as they've been doing for decades, even before Brexit took place. And yet all we're doing is sending money to France and indeed in many cases paying for people to come here and be put up in 4- or 5-star luxury hotels at the cost of the tax. And then when we do find alternative solutions such as Rwanda, the lawyers jump in, Home Office staff try and frustrate the policy, and then of course we have the ship, and then of course more bureaucratic hurdles are being put in the way. Really Britain has done more than its fair share. We're a crowded island. There's pressure on the green belt. There's pressure for jobs, for schooling, for places at doctors, at dentists. Yet, of course, we're just throwing it open to the rest of the world and people who will be working here and exploited in the black economy and used by what are criminals and people who have very little moral compass in using migrants for their own nefarious ends.
Absolutely right. And let's not forget that during COVID, of course, despite the fact that there were restrictions on us travelling anywhere, the migrants were still arriving on the boats willy-nilly and being helped into, buses and being taken to hotels. But there we are. Robert, got to run. Thanks very much indeed for your help. Robert Oulds, director of the Bruges Group. Criminal migrants may now not be able to gain British citizenship. Hurrah! Hallelujah! Eureka, even. For heaven's sake, what's going on?